Welcome to Pioneer Mindset, a place where we challenge our mindset and address the discomfort in both business and life by finding clarity resulting in bold conviction. I'm your host, Garrett Ruskamp, fifth-generation farmer, husband, and father from rural Nebraska. Whether you're navigating frustration from past decisions or worry about the uncertainty you face today in your business, we're going to learn from our struggles and take on new challenges with a resilient mindset. Join me as I share my journey of struggles I faced in agriculture as a farmer and family man. I'm ready to dive into honest conversations to tackle the mindsets surrounding key issues that rural ag business owners face that will ultimately help you gain control, leading to a profitable and sustainable business. Let's adapt to Pioneer Mindset and get to it. Welcome back, everyone. I want to continue to dive into this concept around the 6 skill sets that will pay you for life. Now, once again, this is a training that I went through in a network that I'm a part of. So I'm just kind of taking these different skill sets and then trying to make them relatable to my life, maybe your life, or everyday lives, and how we can kind of interact and really work through them. So the first one, as I mentioned last episode, was the skill set of speaking. So now we're going to piggyback off of that one and talk about the skill set of seduction. Now, before your mind goes down a rabbit hole, this is not what you think. We're going to keep this clean. Rather, we're talking about this in the context of persuading or influencing. Now, what does this really mean to you? What does seduction or persuading or influencing really mean to you? For me, I'd say this is a matter of just trying to get my way, trying to talk with somebody or be in a relationship with somebody, trying to make a decision with somebody, maybe negotiating, just really trying to get my way, trying to get my interest across, and rather just trying to figure out what's going to work best for both people. And really what this comes down to is influencing or persuading someone through appealing to their emotions or desires, rather than logic or rational arguments. Now, you can probably think of in different ways, maybe how sometimes when you're trying to get somebody to do something that you want to do, you just go straight to logic, or you just start arguing. Maybe this is with your wife, maybe this is with a coworker, or maybe even your kids. And really, I think this is an important skill set that we have never really been taught or conditioned how to actually go through with this and to really try to help be like a mutual benefit to both parties. So I want to kind of dive into this a little bit. And really what I want to also note here is it's all about creating emotional connection and building trust. So I want you to kind of keep that in mind as we go through this. So one thing I want to mention here is I've kind of had a little bit of a backstory on this. Is I've actually, I always say I read a book in my head when I start talking. I say, well, I read this book. Well, really the matter of the fact is I listen to most of my books. I'm not much of a reader. I wish I had more time to read. I wish I made more time to read, but truth be told, I'm just not much of a reader. So 9 times out of 10, when I'm talking about a book, I'm talking about some sort of audio book that I've listened to, usually when I'm out in the tractor doing something else that I can try to consume that content, and that's been great for me. But the book that I'm talking about here specifically is called Getting to the Yes. And it's basically about negotiations, and there's lots of books out there that are about that similar topic of negotiating. And for me, this was a good book. If I'm going to be honest, though, I never did fully finish it because it was kind of one of those books that was a little bit hard to listen to. And when I'm out doing something, it's got to be a book that really grabs my attention and really makes it easy for me to want to keep listening, then also make the content really easily to digest and to remember and go back and reference. This was a good book and definitely pulled a lot of things away from that. So I want to kind of dive into that and talk about some of the things that they took away. Starting with when it comes to any type of relationship here, when you're trying to negotiate something or just trying to get your way and trying to help somebody come along and do what you want them to do. Really what this comes down to is focus on interest over positions. Now, what does that mean? Well, we all have interest when we're trying to talk to somebody or trying to get somebody to do something that we want them to do, rather than a position of, I'm going to use this example because when I listened to this book, really what was going through my head was trying to negotiate maybe a land rent with a landowner. So, okay, we've got, I want to go into this meeting with this landowner and I want to pay $250 an acre for rent. And they're asking $300. We're both at that position. Those are our positions. I'm at $250, they're at $300. Well, what are the true interests here? Well, really, I'm interested in renting that land back. I'm interested in trying to be profitable within my own business. That's why I want to keep that rate lower. But let's be mindful here over what are maybe their interests as well. So I think it's important that we don't argue over positions because that can really threaten our relationships. Ultimately, we don't want that. They don't want that, and I don't want that. So in most cases, that's kind of what I'm meaning when I say focus on interest over positions. Now, when we get to talking about interests, I think it's important that we make a list of our interests, and it's our job to really make that other side or that other party known of what our interests are. So you need to be really concise and maybe be simple to where it can be perceived the way that it's supposed to be. And that's really, like I said, our job to make our interests known to the other party or who we're dealing with, whoever we're talking with. It's also important for us to pay attention to what their interests are as well. I think it's important that we need to try to understand, maybe try to put yourself in their shoes. Now, when we're talking about like maybe a high stakes, really strategic negotiation, whatever this may be, putting yourself in their shoes may sound, uncomfortable. Why would I want to do that? That means like I'm probably going to give in to what they want to do. No, I think it's important that going back to the interest that you need to fully understand, try to put yourself in their shoes. Where are they coming from? What are the interests that they're trying to get at as well? And really just see it from a different perspective. And that might ultimately help you guys kind of reach something that's mutual. The last thing I want to hit here from that book, or the takeaway here, was be hard on the problem, not the people. And that kind of goes back to, arguing over positions threatens relationships. And I think that's important that we realize, let's be hard on the problem. Let's try to find a solution to the problem, but let's not try to damage our relationships. Let's not try to burn bridges in the process. And I'm sure as I'm talking about this, maybe you can think back to a relationship that you had that went south and you're like, screw this. This relationship is done. We're going to burn this bridge. We're not going to have to worry about this in the future. Well, is that really what you wanted long term? Is that really going to serve you long term? Maybe it is. Maybe the best thing is just to get rid of that person. But really, if it's maybe a business relationship or even a personal relationship, deep down, I don't think we really want to truly burn that bridge because you just never know what may come of a relationship in the future. So let's just kind of be mindful about that, and let's be hard on the problem, not the people. And really, let's try to invent an option for mutual gain. And that's what this comes down to, is let's try to come up with different things that might meet both of our interests, and that we can both kind of have some mutual gain from that as well. This might take a little bit of a turn from the whole talking about influencing or persuading, but ultimately, I think getting to the yes, that's really what this all comes down to. That was a good book. I do advise you to listen to it. There's a lot of takeaways there. Those were kind of the key ones that I found were important that I took away from that book. Now, kind of diving into this and switching gears a little bit, how can this work in our everyday lives? So I want you to think about maybe just the business side of things first. Maybe you've got big decisions and you've got little decisions all throughout our day, throughout our weeks, in our days in the operation. We've always got big decisions, little decisions. And on the little decision side of things, it might be just talking with your dad or maybe talking with an employee and trying to convince them or persuade them that it's more important to plant the ground or the corn at this angle versus that angle, or plant this seed versus that seed. And different things like that might be little decisions, but we can take this in consideration. Take this thought process of trying to persuade them or influence them, or the seduction side of things, to really try to convince them to do things really your way. But it doesn't come down to just your way. You're trying to find something that's mutual beneficial to both of you. And really what this also comes down to is understanding the why, trying to get them to see, this is why I think it's important to do it this way versus that way. And this is my experience. This is why I say this, is because I've had experience doing this in the past. Now, I want to take this into a different, like I said before, on the bigger decision side of things. take this into a different conversation. Negotiations maybe with a landlord over rent. And usually those are tough conversations, especially me coming from a producer, because I feel like I have very little power in those situations. Because, okay, if you say I'm going to pay $250, that's my top dollar, that's it, but they want $300 and you're not willing to pay that, well, they're just kind of, okay, sorry, screw you. I'm going to go down the road. I'm going to rent it to that guy who's willing to pay me $300. And that's what you have going on in your mind. So you go into that conversation with a little bit of scarcity, and you go in maybe feeling like you don't have the power in that conversation. Well, let's flip this a little bit. How can we find an interest for them that's mutual beneficial? Okay, so you're willing to pay $250 an acre for rent, whatever that number is, but that's where you're starting at. You really don't want to go over that. Maybe it'd be a benefit to them if you had them out on the farm a couple times throughout the year. Maybe they're an old farmer and they just want to ride in a combine. They want to give them something to do. Maybe you've got some trees in the ditches that need to be cleaned up. So, okay, that's part of the deal is I'll pay $250 an acre, but I'll clean these trees up for you. And that's a benefit to them. So maybe you can kind of find a halfway point there to kind of meet in the middle a little bit. Or maybe this comes to big decisions when it comes to buying equipment and you're trying to negotiate with the seller, trying to figure out what's going to work. Well, maybe they can throw in this, or maybe it's a dealer and they can throw in, a wax, or they can clean the tractor up, or whatever that looks like. I mean, there's just so many different ways we can look at this. The last one here on the business side of things, on maybe bigger conversations, is ones that I've mentioned in the past, is talking with your banker. Maybe you're trying to negotiate a deal for your operation to where you've got an expansion, trying to put this loan together, and you need to negotiate this deal and you're trying to negotiate interest rates specifically. Well, maybe you can try to say, I'll pay this interest rate, but I want you to waive all the bank fees. I want you to waive those for the next 5 years because there's always going to be bank fees every year. Or maybe you can say, hey, I'll pay this lower interest rate, but instead I'll pay the bank fees because they're ultimately going to be lower. And I'm going to keep you updated. I'm going to have you out to the farm twice a year. You're going to know all of our numbers inside and out, and that's going to give them the confidence to give you that lower interest rate. So that's just kind of some thoughts that come to mind, some situations that might come up in our lives, in the business lives specifically, when it comes to influencing or talking about basically persuading people to do what we want them to do. Now let's take this to maybe a personal level, because this can be applicable across all areas of our life, including maybe family issues. Maybe you're dealing with things with your parents. You're trying to persuade them to do different things. Or specifically on the day-to-day, I'd say maybe your kids or your spouse. It's always been said that it's hard to negotiate with kids because it's hard to negotiate with a terrorist. If your kids are kind of ones that are like mine, where they don't listen very often, it's just really hard to even talk to them sometimes. Well, let's maybe take this into consideration. Well, I'm going to give you an example where maybe it's at bedtime. And for our kids, bedtime is usually filled with lots of energy, filled with lots of stories, and they want you to keep reading stories. They want you to keep filling up their juice. They want you to keep covering them up in bed. Well, maybe let's just figure out what's the interest for both of us. Well, my interest is having them go to bed, reading stories, having it be a pleasant event that's not filled with complete and utter chaos and noise. That's my interest. Okay, what's their interest? Well, they want to feel like they're tucked in, like they're no longer thirsty. They want to feel like they're safe and they're comfortable in bed. What can we do to make that work out well for both of us? Then obviously with your spouse, there's always lots of conversations there that you're trying to persuade them to do this or that. And really what this comes down to is trying to persuade or influence without getting into a big argument right away, because that's how things typically break out, because we take positions versus interest. We're not taking the time to be considerate as to what are my wife's interests or what are his interests in this conversation. Maybe we ultimately have the same interests, but our positions are all really different, and we're just so stuck in the mud and not willing to give in. And I think that's important to consider these different things. Now I want to turn this a little bit. When we want to talk about these different things, when it talks about, trying to persuade somebody or trying to influence them, or in the matter of seduction. I feel like in my head, it comes down to we're really trying to work towards a win-win situation. We're trying to persuade them. It's an ethical thing that we're trying to do that works out well for both of us. It's not one of those things where it's I win, you lose, or you win, I lose. And I really think in our head, that's what it comes down to, because it's kind of like money. We think, okay, if I've got money, I had to take that from somebody else in order to get it. Or if that person down the road that's rich and has more than I do, they're just being greedy and they had to take that from somebody else. Well, that's not always the case. This can be a win-win situation. And so I think that's super important to realize. Now, I want to kind of start to wrap this up, and I want you to realize, how can this really work in your life? Maybe if you really try to deep down dive into this skill of seduction and persuading and influencing, how can that work in your life? How can things change if you actually really try to conquer it and believe that it's a true lifelong skill? Now, obviously, it's always a work in progress. But imagine communicating without getting into an argument right away, especially with your spouse. Or maybe your dad, where you're just your father-son operation and you guys are constantly bickering all the time. Imagine communicating without getting into an argument right away. I think that's a super big benefit that could really impact a lot of lives there. How can this skill be used in your life? I want you to really consider that. Or maybe rather, I ask, where could it be used? But I think the better question is, where could it not be used? Because this could be used everywhere, I think. In all that we do, all our conversations with our kids, coworkers, teammates, business partners, other people we're trying to do business with. I think this is super important, and I really hope that you maybe dive into this a little bit more, maybe learn how you can apply this in your life. And I really hope you found this valuable. And we will catch you on the next one as we continue to dive into the different skill sets that will pay you back for life. Thanks for tagging along with me today as we sharpened our mindsets. If you've gained insight from today's episode, be sure to take a screenshot to share or send this episode to somebody who might also find value in it. For more, follow me on Instagram at Garrett Ruskamp or on Facebook, and join me next time for more conviction through clarity.